So are you thinking about making a move out of state over the next, 3 to 6 months, and curious to know a little bit more about what to do, how to do it, and make sure that you have the right plan in order to make that move a success? Well, then this video is going to be for you. We're going to go over 5 things that I look at and that I think need to be taken into serious consideration as you're putting together your plan for that move. And stick around because I think the last one is going to be the most important. Hey guys, it's Bill Stewart with the Bill Stewart Homes team here at RE/MAX Moves in Simpsonville, South Carolina. And we're going over the idea of what to be looking for and when you're putting a plan together if you're making a move out of state. And I think a lot of times, the excitement about moving somewhere new is always a lot of fun. My wife and I and our kids just moved, we moved to the upstate a little over 5 years ago. And I remember thinking I was so excited about going to just a new destination after living in Florida for over 30 years. But the idea is that I remember looking back, thinking to myself, I didn't think about this. I wasn't sure where to go for, certain things in terms of, how do I register my car? What do I need to know? What do I need to have with me? And what kind of paperwork am I going to need in order to be able to prove that I actually do live here versus Florida? And so, there was a lot of, I would say, excitement, but then also some anxious nervousness in regards to whether or not we were doing the right things, or if we had the right plan in order. So, when I look at and talk to buyers, especially now that we're at the beginning of the year, we're talking to a lot of buyers that are looking to either make moves here to the Greenville, South Carolina area, or preparing to make moves to go elsewhere. And so as we're starting to talk through some of the things that I see, the pitfalls, or I guess the lack of information that I see happen, is the things that people aren't taking into account that can have significant impact as far as what they're going to encounter when they move to these new places. So really, number one that I look at is the cost of living and tax implications between where you are currently and where you're going to be going. Because it's not just about a mortgage payment. It's not just about, the idea of, house-related income. It's the house-related expenses, sorry. You got to calculate the difference between the property taxes in the area where you are and the property taxes of where you're going to go. We moved from Florida where there was no state income tax. So moving to South Carolina where it was 7% or 6.5%, I think, if you're with the married, the marginal difference, we had to take all of these things into account. And for us, it was property taxes were a lot higher in Florida. Our homeowner's insurance was a lot higher in Florida. Moving to South Carolina, that was, we cut a lot of those costs, if not in half, even down to a quarter of what we were paying there, but that it needed to be something that we paid attention to as we started to evaluate what made the most sense for us, whether to stay or go. And then we have to take a look at everyday expenses, like your utilities and groceries. If you're moving from, say, you're moving from an area where you're a more southern state where things are a little more consistent in terms of temperature. You're now moving into an area where you could have some temperature fluctuations. So looking at what is the gas and the heating bill going to be like in the wintertime compared to an area that you went to, or if you're moving from an area where winters were harsh, but at the end of it summers were okay. But you're moving somewhere farther south where at that point, air conditioning expenses and the utilities to be able to keep the house, your condition, your home, comfortable throughout the year could have a significant impact, especially if there are local state taxes and how those all kind of play into your overall bill. So, you may look at a salary. If you're moving here for a job, you could be looking at a higher salary, but that might actually result less in disposable income if the cost of living jumps significantly. So it really needs to be something a lot of times, where it's the excitement of moving, but not really taking a look at all the cost involved. So definitely cost of living, tax implications would be something that you need to seriously research. 2, the healthcare and health continuity. So let's say you're moving from an area and you have a specific health need. Don't just assume you're going to find the same level of care immediately in a new area or a new state, right? So really what a lot of times where it's, I've dealt with clients where they've had specific situations, whether it be, something they've been dealing with a specialist, but they're really eager to get out of the state. And that at that point, they're finding it harder for that specific, a specific specialist to be able to continue that care. So I would say really research your specialists, work with your doctors in the state that you're in and see if they have referrals or somebody else that they can basically try to help you off and hand you over to in order to be able to keep those things going. The other would be transferring your medical records. Make sure that all of that stuff's coming with you, whether you print it out. A lot of it's digital now, so at that point it can be sent. But then the other is that you make sure that your health insurance coverage, not only is it overlapping in between the move, but there are some times where certain health insurance companies may or may not be licensed in the state that you're in. So making sure that you understand that, finding out and making sure that that health insurance coverage that you have had, that you are, that they can follow with you, or the idea that you can research to be able to make sure that you're finding something that's going to be comparable in the new state where you're in. Number 3, climate and weather preparedness. Like I would say, a lot of times when you're moving from an environment, we moved from Florida to South Carolina about 5 years ago. And so the climate here is a little bit different. It's not, we don't work in drastic it wasn't a drastic shift, but it was definitely, and it's not a harsh winter, but it's definitely 4 distinct seasons where Florida was, I would say probably 2 or 3 seasons, hotter, and then the hottest during the summertime. Here where you have like specifically, I would say summers here are warmer then they feel warmer to me than Florida. But then you have fall, spring, and we do have a winter here. Like as of this morning when we woke up, it was in the 20s. It's January right now, and we're looking at potentially a wintry mix through all of next week. So things that we weren't really used to in Florida, really didn't have to deal with. Coming here, we really needed to pay attention to it. So, whether you're moving from the north down to the south, where things like it's not just about the wardrobe you're going to be wearing, on a daily basis, but it's also like, how does this affect things like vehicles? Like if you're moving from the south to the north, are you going to have to consider things like snow tires, snow chains, equipment and things like that to be able to manage, for those wintry conditions, to be able to clear things out? Or the other is just the idea of having your understanding what the heating bill is going to look like in the winter, what the cooling bill is going to look like in the summer, depending on what climate that you're going to. And also too, like, what is that going to look like from a daily commute for you, in terms of, where you are in proximity to things, and just kind of getting an idea of like your overall like traffic flow patterns and livability within those areas. So, really paying attention to understanding what that looks like. It will also, like, these are questions a lot of times people don't think about because in their, they don't think about it because they haven't had to think about it. But you could have our heating bill this year for Christmas time was roughly around $320, which was significantly higher. That was higher than last year, but it was because we've also had some colder days this year versus last year. So pay attention to those things. Number 4 would be the job market and commute. So, you might be working remotely now, but considering the long-term job market in a new area, if you were to lose the job that you had right now and then had to go and like take a job, that it would be looking at who are the employers that are going to be around. Do they support, remote work? If you're working in an office, the idea that, mileage can be different depending on where you're at. The concept behind, where I live about a mile away from the office here, but reality is in the mornings to get to work, sometimes it can take me 15 minutes just based off the traffic pattern. And then the other is like, what does it look like on a daily basis in terms of, time of day and where you're going to be living within that. So depending on where you are here in the upstate, you could be on one side of 85 and the traffic commute may not be that big a deal, but the closer you get into city center and having to use 85 as a direct thoroughfare could drastically impact your morning and afternoon commutes. So, really paying attention to those kinds of things. So I always like to tell people as they come into an area, one of the biggest things is to, come visit and at that point, like, drive in and around the place where you are throughout those times of day, just to kind of get a feel of what that heartbeat of that area looks like. So, because a lot of times you're coming here for a job, you're making a move with the idea that you're going to go find a job. And so, thankfully in our area, we have a very we have a very strong job market, but depending on where you go, that might not necessarily be the case. So that may want to be factored into as far as, if you're making a move with a company, the idea of that job, if you want to move or change jobs, will this possibly require you to make another move again? And having those things, if you're comfortable making multiple out-of-state moves, that's good. But the idea is that a lot of people are looking to move, to get away from things, and ultimately it's not something that we do often. So really just looking at job market and the livability. Number 5 would be, what's the social support and what's your neighborhood vibe? Like, leaving your support system is one of the hardest things. And I can say that from, personal experience. I left 30 years worth of friendships, and, I knew every back road throughout Orlando and Melbourne, Satellite Beach in Florida. Like, I knew them like the back of my hand. And here I am moving to an area where I have no idea where I am is situated in regards to all of the other things. I didn't have the local knowledge. So, the other was things like, I didn't know anything about the neighborhoods, or, what was from a safety perspective. Am I in a good area? Am I in a hard area? What's going to be the best situation for the kids? It was also not understanding things like schools. It was really important to my wife to understand, that the kids continued in the level of schools that we had left in Florida. And so thankfully we fell into a great area here in the Five Forks area, but we didn't know anything about Five Forks. We just kind of happened to fall into it. And thankfully we did, but it was really directed mostly by the fact of just really looking at making sure that the education for the kids didn't drop. So, but the other thing is that, like, if you're social and you have involved in clubs or different organizations or things like that, like, is the community that you're moving to, are those going to be open is there going to be opportunities for those? And how far will those things be from where you're looking to potentially move to within the area that you're relocating to? So making sure that, your community, your neighborhood, does it match your overall lifestyle? And so I would say that's one of the other things, coming back and visit the area before, making a solid decision on where you're going to move really will help to ensure that the culture will fit what you're looking for. And I think sometimes we're not with that. Those things are sometimes taken out of where we love a house, we love an area, but it really doesn't fit our lifestyle. So I think that those are the things that a lot of times don't get taken into account. So anyway, I hope this video is helpful. I think that there's, we have a downloadable guide in links in the description. There's 5 other things that we look at, that we see, that we, as we're discussing with clients, that we hear. So not just these 5, these are kind of above and beyond those, but the download guide is also an opportunity for you to be able to take a look at a couple other things that potentially will help to either, help you prepare, as well as the ability to kind of, to rule out an area potentially if it's not going to fit. Because let's face it, moving is not an easy thing. It's one of the most stressful things you can do, and uprooting from one, you could be leaving a situation where you're looking for something better to turn out to find out that it really doesn't match what you're looking for, or that it ultimately becomes more expensive than what you realized because of the fact that we didn't take all of those things into account. So anyway, if you have any questions, feel free. My contact information is below. And there's also going to be a QR code down here in the bottom that you can click if you would like to set up a 15-minute meeting with myself or my team to discuss more about the Greenville area here in South Carolina. We'd love to be a resource, so feel free to reach out. Anyway, hope you have a great day, and talk with you soon.